My own parents and wife turned on me when I couldn't give them what they wanted. So, 3 years ago, my life pretty much flipped. I was living pretty normally, married to my now ex-wife, Sarah. Things weren't perfect, but they were all right. I was handling work, Sarah had her job, and we were just two people coasting through life, thinking about maybe starting a family at some point. Nothing crazy, just the usual life stuff. Then came the car accident. It was one of those random crappy days where everything seemed to be going wrong. I was just trying to get home, and then suddenly, bam, some idiot ran a light and I didn't even see it coming. Next thing I knew, I was in the hospital bed, banged up and feeling like I got run over by a freight train. Not the most fun experience, to say the least. They kept me in the hospital for a bit just to make sure I was all right and nothing serious was messed up. Physically, I eventually healed, though I had a lot of downtime trying to get my head back in the right place. But the real kicker came a few months after the accident. I started noticing something weird. My energy was low, and I just felt different. Long story short, my doctors told me the impact had affected my fertility, basically cutting out any natural chance of me having kids. Just like that, my whole life flipped again. I wasn't just recovering from a few broken bones anymore. I was now facing the reality that I might never be able to have a family. And honestly, that hit way harder than any bruise or fracture ever could. When I told Sarah, she looked surprised. Yeah, but her reaction wasn't exactly encouraging. She just sat there, nodding like I'd told her the weather report. I didn't expect her to break down or anything, but some kind of reaction would have been nice, you know? It felt like she'd mentally checked out the minute I told her. Afterward, things got really quiet between us. She wasn't rude or anything, just distant. At first, I chalked it up to her maybe processing things, but after a few weeks of that, it was obvious she was avoiding the whole topic. I tried bringing it up with her a few times, just to see if we were on the same page, or if there was something she wanted to talk about, but each time she'd brush it off. She'd say something like, "We'll figure it out," or "Let's not stress about it now." And that was it. No real conversations, no real plans. It's like she didn't want to deal with it at all. Meanwhile, I was already struggling with how much this was messing with my head. I'd always kind of pictured myself as a dad someday. I know, sounds corny, but it was something I wanted, something I was looking forward to. And now, just like that, it was gone. And the one person who was supposed to be in this with me didn't even want to talk about it. I started to feel like I was in this thing on my own. Then there were my parents. Oh man, the way they reacted still blows my mind. My parents always wanted grandkids. They're the traditional type, you know? Think family photos, holiday gatherings, the works. So when I first told them about the accident and everything that came with it, I expected at least a little sympathy, maybe some support. What I got, though, was just silence. They'd ask how I was doing, but only in a "did you heal yet" kind of way. Nothing about how I was feeling mentally or how I was holding up after the fertility news. My dad just kind of nodded, and my mom gave me one of those pity looks like, "Oh, that's too bad." And then, nothing. They changed the subject, started talking about some distant relative's wedding or something like that. It was honestly pretty shocking. Over the next few weeks, I noticed they were calling less, not even checking in on me like they used to. Usually my mom would call a couple of times a week just to chat, but now it was down to once every couple of weeks, and the conversations felt forced, like she didn't really want to be on the phone with me. The silence became so obvious, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I felt like an outsider in my own family, like I'd been put on the back burner because I couldn't give them the grandkids they'd always wanted. One day I tried to bring it up with them, hoping maybe I was just reading too much into it. I told my mom how hard this whole thing had been on me and how I could really use some support. She got quiet and then sighed, saying something like, "Well, it's just a shame, isn't it?" And that was it. No, we're here for you. No, we'll get through this together. Just a shame. I didn't even know what to say after that. I ended up just nodding along, pretending like her response hadn't stung as much as it did. That's when things really started sinking in. Sarah was distancing herself, and my parents, the people I'd thought would always be there no matter what, were acting like I was some sort of broken appliance they didn't know how to fix. So they just decided to ignore it. It's like, in their eyes, my value dropped the minute they found out I couldn't give them what they wanted. I'd go to work, come home, and sit in this empty apartment, trying to process everything, but I kept coming back to the same question. Was my only worth to these people tied to whether or not I could have kids? I started feeling like I didn't even matter to them as a person. They just saw me as a way to get grandkids, and now that that was off the table, they were done with me. It's a brutal feeling, realizing you're disposable to the people you thought would always have your back. And with Sarah, It was like living with a ghost. We'd have meals together in total silence, or she'd stay late at work, or head out without telling me. I was tiptoeing around my own wife, trying to pretend everything was fine. But deep down, I knew she'd already checked out. I'd lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was anything I could do to get things back to normal, but I didn't even know where to start. Every time I tried to bring up the future, she'd shut down or brush me off, like my worries were just inconveniences to her. At that point, it felt like I was the only one left trying to keep things together, and I was exhausted. It's one thing to face a problem with the people you love by your side, but it's something else entirely to go through it alone, with everyone acting like you're not even worth the effort. After weeks of trying to push forward, it became pretty clear that Sarah had mentally checked out. It was in the small things she'd stopped doing. No more goodnight kisses, no more random texts during the day, just silence. I started feeling like I was a stranger in my own home. It's not like we were arguing or anything. It was more like she was just done. Every attempt to talk about the future got shut down, and every suggestion of moving forward felt like a burden to her. At one point, I remember sitting her down saying something like, "We need to talk about this," thinking maybe we could find a way to work through it. I wasn't asking for a miracle. I just wanted to know if we were still in this together. But she just sighed, looked at her phone and said, "I'm exhausted. Can we not do this now?" And that was that. It's hard to explain, but there's this feeling when you realize someone's lost interest in trying, like they're already halfway out the door, and you're just waiting for them to make it official. Meanwhile, my parents were nowhere to be found. Normally, my mom would check in at least once or twice a week, but now it was down to maybe once a month, and even then, the conversations felt forced, like she was doing it out of obligation more than anything else. I tried to reach out a few times, hoping maybe she'd see what I was going through and offer some kind of support, but every call ended the same. Her just saying, "Oh well, life goes on," or something equally dismissive. I was losing everyone who mattered to me, and nobody seemed to care. One night, after another silent dinner with Sarah, I went to bed and just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. I knew the accident had changed things, but I didn't expect it to make everyone treat me like I was some sort of burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. And what's worse was that I started believing it. I started thinking maybe I really was the problem, that somehow, because I couldn't give them the future they'd envisioned, I wasn't worth sticking around for. Around this time, Sarah started spending more time out with friends or working late. It was subtle at first, but then it became a regular thing. She'd come home late, barely say 2 words to me, and go straight to bed. I'd try to ask her about her day, or see if she wanted to do something together, but every time it was the same answer. "I'm tired." I knew what that meant, but I kept pretending it was normal. I didn't want to face the reality that she'd already checked out and was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. One day, I decided to ask her directly if everything was okay. I was half hoping she'd laugh it off and tell me I was overthinking things, but instead she just looked at me with this tired, blank expression and said, "I don't know if this is what I want anymore." No anger, no emotion, just a cold, flat statement. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but I tried to keep it together. I asked her what she meant, hoping she'd say something I could work with, something we could fix. But she just shrugged and said, "Maybe we're just too different." Too different? We'd been together for years. We'd built a life together, shared everything, gone through tough times. Now suddenly we're too different? It didn't make any sense, but it was like she'd already made up her mind. I tried asking her if there was anything I could do to make things right, but she just shook her head, muttering something about how it wasn't about me, but about what she wanted. It was the most confusing, frustrating conversation I'd ever had, and by the end of it, I felt more lost than ever. The next few weeks were brutal. I was doing everything I could think of to make things better, helping around the house, planning little date nights, trying to rekindle what we had, but nothing seemed to make a difference. She'd go through the motions, but I could see in her eyes that she'd already checked out. It was like trying to revive something that was already dead, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I kept hoping, maybe foolishly, that if I just tried hard enough, I could fix it. Then, one evening, I got home from work to find Sarah sitting on the couch with a stack of papers in front of her. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw them. I knew exactly what they were. She didn't even try to soften the blow, just handed me the divorce papers and said, "I think this is what's best for both of us." It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. I asked her if there was any way we could work things out, but she just shook her head, barely making eye contact. I tried to keep my composure, even though I was falling apart inside. I told her I didn't want this, that I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But she wasn't interested. She told me she'd been thinking about it for a while and that she'd just reached her limit. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I nodded, signed the papers, and watched as she left without so much as a backward glance. It was like our entire life together had meant nothing to her. After she left, I sat alone in that empty apartment, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. It was like everything had been ripped out from under me, and I was left standing there, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. I'd lost my wife, and my parents were nowhere to be found. My entire support system had crumbled, and there was nothing I could do to bring it back. In the days that followed, I tried reaching out to my parents, hoping maybe they'd see what I was going through and finally be there for me. But every call went to voicemail, every message left unanswered. It was like I'd been erased from their lives, like I didn't even exist anymore. I couldn't understand it. These were the people who raised me, who I thought would always be there no matter what. Now, when I needed them the most, they'd abandoned me completely. The silence was deafening. Every day I'd come home to that empty apartment, no one to talk to, no one to lean on. I'd try to distract myself, but the loneliness was crushing. I felt like I'd been cast aside, like everyone had decided I wasn't worth the effort. It's hard to explain, but there's this feeling that creeps in when you're left all alone, like you're invisible, like you don't even matter. I started questioning everything, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe I was the problem all along. But deep down, I knew I hadn't done anything to deserve this. I'd done everything I could to make things work, to be there for Sarah, to keep my family close. Yet, here I was, left with nothing but an empty apartment and a whole lot of questions I'd probably never get answers to. After Sarah walked out, I was expecting to be alone for a while, maybe even permanently. I'd finally come to terms with the fact that my family wasn't going to be there for me like I'd always hoped. I thought they'd just let me fade into the background, now that I'd failed to give them the grandkids they'd wanted so badly. But instead of disappearing, they just found new ways to insert themselves into my life and remind me how much of a disappointment they thought I was. The first incident happened a couple of months after the divorce was finalized. My mom called and said she and my dad wanted to come over to check on me. I wasn't thrilled, but a part of me thought, maybe they're actually reaching out this time, trying to make things right. So I agreed to let them come by. They showed up with boxes, literal boxes of my childhood things. Old trophies, dusty certificates, even some embarrassing middle school projects I hadn't seen in ages. They dumped them on my living room floor without any explanation, then stood back like they'd done me some big favor. When I asked why they were suddenly unloading my stuff on me, my mom just shrugged and said, "Well, we're planning to turn your old room into a nursery for when your sister decides to start a family." I was floored. My sister wasn't even dating anyone, as far as I knew, yet they were already prepping my room, my space, for the grandkids they actually cared about. I told them it felt like they were just tossing me aside, and my dad had the nerve to say, "Well, you're not exactly using the space anymore, are you?" That one hit me hard. They didn't even try to hide it. They were done with me, plain and simple. I'd failed to give them what they wanted, so they were cleaning house, literally and emotionally. After they left, I realized I couldn't keep giving them chances. I knew I needed space, so I stopped answering their calls for a while, hoping they'd take the hint. But my mom wasn't about to let me have peace. She started calling from different numbers, and then I started getting texts from her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me that I needed to be there for my family. It was like they'd set up an entire guilt-tripping campaign, all because I wasn't living the way they wanted. The next blow came a couple of months later. My dad showed up unannounced at my place one Saturday morning, dragging in my younger cousin Jake. Jake's been a bit of a troublemaker his whole life. Never held down a job, dropped out of school, always needing to borrow money from someone. Apparently, he'd just gotten kicked out of his latest gig and was in need of a place to crash. And for whatever reason, my dad decided that place should be my apartment. I stood there, completely dumbfounded as my dad dumped Jake's bags in my entryway, acting like it was a done deal. I asked why on earth he thought it was okay to drop my cousin off at my place without even asking, and he had the nerve to say, "Jake's family. We all help each other out when times are tough." I almost laughed at the irony. When I was at my lowest, they didn't even blink before cutting me off. But now they expected me to play hero to my cousin? I told my dad flat out that Jake wasn't staying, that he could find somewhere else to crash. My dad rolled his eyes, muttering about how I'd changed and how I was too selfish now. But I held my ground, and eventually, he left, dragging a sulking Jake behind him. After that, things went quiet for a while. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, I came home to find an envelope stuffed in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mom, dripping with passive aggressiveness. She went on and on about how I was tearing the family apart by being so distant, and that she didn't recognize the person I'd become. She even threw in a line about how it's no wonder Sarah left, as if I hadn't heard that one enough from her already. And then, in the final paragraph, she dropped a bombshell. They wanted me to sign over a portion of my inheritance to my sister. She wrote that since I couldn't give them grandchildren, it was only fair to give some of my share to my sister, so that her children could have a head start in life. They were basically asking me to hand over part of my future to my sister's hypothetical kids, all because I wasn't fulfilling their dream of having grandkids. I was furious. This wasn't just crossing a line, this was burning the line and then stomping on it. I called my mom, and when she answered, I let her have it. I told her how hurtful it was to see them throw me away like I was nothing, to demand that I sacrifice for a family that had treated me like I didn't matter. She stayed silent for a few seconds, then sighed and said, "We just want what's best for the family. You don't understand because you're choosing to be selfish." That was it for me. I realized in that moment that nothing I ever did would be enough for them. I could have handed over everything, bent over backward, and they'd still find a reason to tell me I was failing them. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't call them back. Instead, I blocked their numbers and started preparing myself for the next wave of entitlement. I knew they wouldn't let this go. And sure enough, a week later, my mom showed up at my door, knocking like she was about to knock the whole thing down. When I opened up, she didn't even say hi. She just walked in, uninvited, looking around like she was inspecting my place. Then, without missing a beat, she went off on a tirade about family obligations and how it was my duty to support my sister, to keep the family whole after everything I'd put them through. She had the nerve to act like I was some black sheep, someone who'd wronged them by simply existing. I told her I wasn't giving anything to my sister, that it wasn't my responsibility to fund their dream life. She looked at me, absolutely disgusted, and said, "Well, if that's the way you want it, don't expect to be part of this family anymore." As she stormed out, I realized that was exactly what I wanted. I was done with their expectations, their demands, their constant reminders of how I'd failed to live up to their perfect vision. I didn't want to be part of a family that only valued me for what I could give them. I wanted peace, and for the first time, I was okay with walking away to find it. That was the day I took back control. And even though I knew there'd be fallout, I knew it was worth it. After a year of trying to put myself back together, I was finally starting to feel like my old self again, just a little rougher around the edges. I was living my life without tiptoeing around anyone's expectations. I'd reconnected with some friends, picked up a few new hobbies, and honestly, I'd stopped looking back. It was around this time that I met Emily. We didn't meet through an app or on some planned setup. It was completely random. I'd signed up for a photography class at the community center, one of those things I'd been wanting to try for a while, but never had the time or guts to do. Emily was in the same class, and she'd been doing photography for a while, but mostly as a hobby. I noticed her right away because she seemed genuinely interested, not just in the technical stuff, but in the little stories you could tell through photos. She was one of those people who could take a picture of a sidewalk, and somehow, it would feel like it had a life of its own. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured she was just another classmate. But after a couple of sessions, we started chatting here and there, mostly about the assignments. She was down to earth, funny, and had this effortless way of making everyone around her feel comfortable. It was nice, not having to pretend or put on some sort of act. She was just real. One day after class, a group of us decided to go grab coffee nearby. Emily and I ended up sitting next to each other, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation. We didn't talk about anything crazy, just random stuff. Favorite movies, weird travel experiences, why we even bothered signing up for a class when most people would just watch a YouTube tutorial. I remember thinking how easy it was to talk to her, like we'd known each other for ages. There was no awkwardness, no forced small talk, just a genuine conversation with someone who actually listened. As the weeks went by, we kept hanging out after class, sometimes just us, other times with a group. But even when there were other people around, it felt like it was just the two of us. I wasn't thinking about dating or getting into anything serious. I'd learned my lesson with rushing things, but I couldn't deny there was something special about Emily. I hadn't felt this kind of connection in, well, maybe ever. It wasn't based on some shared idea of what our lives were supposed to look like. It was just two people enjoying each other's company. After a couple of months, Emily and I started spending more time together outside of class. We'd go for walks, check out local art shows, grab food from random food trucks in the city. Nothing big, just little things that ended up meaning a lot. She had this way of making every moment feel like its own adventure, even if we were just wandering around the city with no real plan. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder or waiting for the other shoe to drop. With Emily, it was just easy. Eventually, I opened up to her about my past. It wasn't something I was looking forward to, but I felt like if this was going anywhere, she deserved to know. So one night, after we'd gone to this hole-in-the-wall diner we found, I told her everything. About Sarah, the accident, my family's reaction to my infertility, everything. I expected her to look at me with pity, maybe some discomfort, but she just listened, nodding every now and then. When I was done, she didn't act shocked or sad. She just said, "That sounds really rough. You're pretty strong for getting through all that." It was such a simple thing to say, but it meant the world to me. No one had ever put it like that before. People either acted like I was broken or just brushed it off like it didn't matter. But Emily, she just got it. No drama, no pity, just understanding. That was probably the moment I realized I wanted more than friendship with her, though I didn't say anything just yet. I was cautious, probably more than I needed to be, but I didn't want to mess this up. A few weeks later, Emily invited me to this event her friends were hosting, a small art show where they were displaying some of their work. She'd been helping out with the setup and thought it'd be fun for me to tag along. It was a bit nerve-wracking meeting her friends, but they were just like her, laid back, creative, and not judgmental at all. I ended up having a great time, and afterward, as we walked back to her place, I could feel this unspoken shift between us. It wasn't anything big or dramatic, just a quiet understanding that we both wanted something more. The next time we hung out, I finally worked up the nerve to ask her out properly. I was nervous as hell, not gonna lie. I'd been through so much that the idea of opening up to someone again scared me, but with Emily, it felt like a risk worth taking. She smiled, nodded, and just said, "I'd love to." Simple as that. Dating Emily was nothing like my previous relationship. With her, there was no pressure to be anything other than who I was. She never made me feel like I had to prove myself or live up to some impossible standard. She accepted me, flaws and all, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. I could just be me, and that was enough. We started spending almost every weekend together, exploring the city, taking little road trips, and finding new hobbies. She even got me back into photography, which had taken a back seat for a while. I hadn't felt this alive in years. There was this ease to our relationship, a comfort I'd never experienced before. Emily had this way of making even the smallest moments feel special, like every second counted. And then, something I thought was impossible happened. I got some unexpected news from the doctor. Turns out my treatments had worked better than I'd ever hoped. I wasn't just maybe able to have kids. I was actually capable of starting a family. No additional treatments needed. It was a shock, honestly, but an incredible one. I remember telling Emily, half expecting her to freak out, but she just smiled and said, "Maybe it was meant to be." It was a lot to process, but Emily's calm, grounded reaction made it easier. She didn't act like this huge news changed anything about us. She just accepted it as part of our story, and that's when I knew, beyond a doubt, that she was the one. After I got that news from the doctor, life felt different. Like, for the first time in years, I didn't have this heavy weight on my shoulders. I told Emily everything, and we both agreed to take things one step at a time. We didn't have to rush into anything, and honestly, I was just enjoying life with her, seeing where things would go naturally. But a few months later, we found out we were expecting. The day we found out we were having a baby girl, I couldn't believe it. I mean, after everything I'd gone through, all the treatments, all the struggles, I was actually going to be a dad. Emily was glowing, already picking out names and little baby outfits, and I'll admit, I got pretty into it too. I'd wander through stores and find myself holding tiny shoes, imagining our little girl walking around someday. I'd never thought I'd get a chance to be a dad, so every part of it felt like a miracle. As we prepared for our daughter's arrival, we kept things quiet. I was still keeping my distance from my family, and most of my old connections were out of the picture. I hadn't bothered letting my parents know anything about my life for years, and I didn't see a reason to start now. My life had moved on without them, and honestly, I was fine with that. I had Emily, my little family, and I was finally at peace. One afternoon, Emily and I were taking our daughter, who was only a few months old, out for a walk around the neighborhood. She was sleeping soundly in the stroller, and we were just talking about random stuff, our plans, the future, silly things she did as a baby. It was one of those perfect, peaceful days, and that's when I saw them, my parents. They were walking down the same street, coming out of a house a few doors down. I guess they were visiting someone in the area, but it was the last thing I expected. I froze. I didn't know what to do, and part of me thought about turning around and just walking away. But before I could even move, they spotted me. My mom's eyes lit up when she saw us, like she'd just won the lottery or something. She nudged my dad, and they started walking over, all smiles, like they'd just seen their long-lost son. It was surreal. They came up to us, glancing at the stroller, probably putting two and two together. My mom's first words were, Is this your daughter?" She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually gone on to have a family without their help. I nodded, keeping things short, and they both stared at her like they were seeing a ghost. I could tell they wanted to ask a million questions, but I wasn't about to make this reunion easy for them. My dad finally spoke up, saying something like, "We're glad to see you're doing well. We've missed you." And that's when all the memories started flooding back. The years of silence, the way they'd treated me when I was at my lowest, and how they basically wrote me off when I couldn't give them what they wanted. Now here they were, acting like we just had some minor disagreement, expecting me to welcome them back with open arms just because they finally decided to show up. I kept my tone calm, but I made it clear I hadn't forgotten what they did. I told them straight up, "You walked out of my life when I needed you most. You abandoned me. I had to rebuild everything on my own, and now you want back in because you see me with a family? It doesn't work that way." My mom looked stunned, like she didn't know how to respond, and my dad just kind of nodded, not saying anything. They tried to play the sympathy card, talking about how hard it was for them when they found out I couldn't have kids. They started making it sound like they were the victims, like I'd somehow hurt them by not being able to give them grandkids back then. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I wasn't going to let them manipulate me. I'd been through too much to let them guilt-trip me into forgiving them. I told them, "I'm not going to pretend like nothing happened. You cut me off when I was struggling, made me feel like I wasn't worth anything because I couldn't give you what you wanted. And now that I have a family, you think you can just walk back in?" My mom looked like she was going to cry, and my dad tried to reason with me, saying that they'd always loved me, and that they just made mistakes. But I was done with their excuses. I'd spent too many nights wondering if I'd done something wrong, wondering why my own family had abandoned me. And now, with my daughter and Emily by my side, I realized that I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I had the family I always wanted, and they weren't going to be part of it. After a few awkward moments of silence, my mom finally asked if they could meet their granddaughter. She reached out toward the stroller, like she expected me to just hand her over. That was my breaking point. I stepped in front of the stroller, putting myself between them and my daughter. I told them flat out, "You lost the right to be part of my life, and you sure as hell aren't going to be part of hers. I don't owe you that." They looked genuinely shocked, like they couldn't believe I'd shut them out so completely. My mom started pleading, saying they'd do anything to make things right, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I'd given them enough chances, and they'd shown me exactly who they were. I wasn't going to risk letting them back into my life just so they could hurt me, or worse, my daughter. Before they could say anything else, I just told them, "This is the life I built without you. I don't need you, and neither does she." With that, I turned the stroller around and walked away, not looking back. Emily squeezed my hand, giving me a supportive smile, and in that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't letting them have power over me. That was the end of it. I'd faced them, stood my ground, and finally put the past behind me. My parents had missed out on my life, and now they'd miss out on my daughter's too. And honestly, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. As we walked back home, I felt this incredible sense of peace, like a weight had been lifted. I looked down at my daughter, asleep in her stroller, and knew I'd made the right decision. I'd given her the best gift I could, the promise that she'd grow up surrounded by people who truly loved her, people who would never walk out on her when things got tough. That day, I closed the door on my past for good. I had my family, my real family, and I was finally free to move forward without any regrets.